Hi, this is Sean Zenz, Team Lead of Sales Engineering at Enable Technologies. In the first video we covered off orientation, how to access resources, how to access training, how to set up your N-central server and connect to that N-central server. In this video we're going to cover off deployment, creating our first customer, preparing the customer site for a probe deployment, installing the probe on a server, and using a discover job to discover the entire network. In the next video, we'll be covering off filters, rules, notifications, service templates, and a lot more core concepts as well. Let's go ahead and move on to deployment. I'm going to log into an N-central server, create a customer, and install a probe. I've opened up a web browser to access N-central. Now, of course, if you're a hosted customer, the URL for your N-central server is located under the Enable Resource Center under My Account. As an on-premise customer, you of course set up your own server. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to log in with the default account for an on-premise server, which is productadmin@n-able.com. As a hosted customer, the default is going to be admin@yourdomain.com. So I'm going to log in here as productadmin@n-able.com, and the default password is capital P password if you of course have not changed it yet. Now the first time you log into N-central, you're going to be asked for a lot of different information. You're going to be asked for a ID. That ID you can find on the Enable Resource Center. You're going to be asked for a network address, which you can specify your external host name for N-central. And you're going to be asked for a company name as an on-premise customer. That company name will be created as what's called a service organization within N-central. Now, when I log in here as that product admin the second time, I arrive at what's called the system level. The system level is that red level there on the very top left. What we're going to do is we're going to make sure that N-central is set up with all the right prerequisites before we do our deployment. So on the left hand side here, we're going to click on Administration, and we're going to go ahead first and click on Defaults, Agent/Probe Settings. What we're doing here is we're defining a URL or an address for the agent and probe to check into. So here you can see that I currently have sedemo1.n-able.com, which is the appropriate address for my N-central server, but this may contain your internal host name, and you'll need to change that so that your probes can access and your agents can access the N-central server externally. So go ahead and double click on the existing internal host name, or of course you can delete it and add a new one. And what you want to do is set that external ID or external host name. I'm going to go ahead and propagate these changes out by clicking those buttons and by clicking Save, of course. And that will propagate that change out to any existing SO or existing customers I have. Now, being as this is a first deployment, I won't have any customers yet, and we're going to create one here in a second. The other item I need to go through is my mail settings. So I need to make sure that I have an SMTP relay set up, or mail relay server. If I have an external Exchange server or maybe some sort of hosted Exchange server, I can check this radio button, I can put in my mail server information, and if required, I can put in authentication. Choose my authentication, and I can put in a username and a password for that mail server. I may choose not to use a relay server, and N-central has a built-in send mail server to actually send messages externally. What we're going to do next here is actually deploy out to a test environment. So we'll need to switch back to the SO level. And the SO level stands for Service Organization, and that's your company level, your MSP level. My SO level in my case is called Training Deployment. So I'm going to go ahead and select Training Deployment from the drop down on the top left, and you can search for it if you'd like. And that's going to bring me to a wizard in which I can create a customer or a site. Now, how the hierarchy works is at the very top level, the red level, you have System. In the middle, you have your Service Organization, which you have one of by default. And below your service organization, or the MSP level, we have our customers. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a customer here right off the bat. Now the customer, I'm going to call this customer 1. And I'm going to choose what type of licenses customer 1 uses. Now, is this a managed customer? If this is a managed customer, I'm going to say that I'm going to use professional licensing. Is this maybe a break-fix customer, or is this a prospect, which I'm simply trying to do a network assessment? If that's the case, I'm going to choose essential licensing. Now you can see here my default credentials. I can either inherit credentials or I can specify custom credentials. When I'm deploying out to a domain or workgroup, I want to put custom credentials. And the account I'll use for a workgroup is going to be some sort of local administrator that exists on each one of those devices. If I don't have an account yet that exists on every single one of those devices, I still want to define one, and we can actually create it later on in N-central. For a domain, the same rule exists. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to put in an account that does not exist yet in my domain with a password that of course does not exist yet. And I'm going to actually create this account within Active Directory. So here you can see I've called it RMM Tech. And this account is going to be used purely for N-central deployment and running tasks through N-central on that domain. If this was a workgroup, I would simply specify perhaps RMM Tech on its own. I would not put workgroup / RMM Tech. I would only put RMM Tech with a password. Now the password I'm using has complexity. The reason is I want to standardize across all of my customers. And the last thing I need is for me to deploy out to the 5th customer and realize that I'm not using complex passwords and I won't be able to create that account on that customer due to some sort of security they have in place. So I'm going to try to use an account that is complex enough that I can use it on every single one of my customer sites. Now when I go ahead and I save and continue, we're going to move from training deployment, as in our MSP level. It's going to actually take us down to the customer level. So you'll notice that that switches from the orange level to a green level, which is now a customer level. Now that I have my customer created, right off the bat, is this a work group or is this a domain? If this is a work group, my deployment's going to be a little different. If this is a work group, what I'm going to be doing is installing an agent on each one of my devices manually. Whether I do it, or perhaps I email a link to my end users for them to install it. What I would do in a workgroup is under Actions, I would click on Download Agent / Probe Software. I would right click on the customer specific software, Windows Agent. I would copy that link, so copy link location, or the equivalent in Internet Explorer. I would go ahead and email that link over to my end user. And you can see that if I paste that into a browser, that'll automatically download customer 1's Windows Agent. So that means that when that user installs it, keep in mind they have to be a local administrator for them to install it themselves. When that user installs it, it'll automatically check into N-central under the appropriate customer and set up its own monitoring. Now, if they are not a local administrator in that workgroup environment, then you'll want to put it on a USB drive and you'll want to install it manually. Walk around the office and install it on each one of those devices. Now, the deployment on a domain is going to be quite different. On a domain, we have a domain controller, so we're going to actually install the Windows Probe on a server within that customer environment. It doesn't necessarily need to be the domain controller, just needs to be a server within that environment. So what we want to do is we want to get that software over to the server. However you typically connect to your Windows server, whether it's through RDP, whether it's through some other remote control software, what we're going to do is we're going to right click on Windows Probe and we're actually going to copy link location. That's going to copy the installer so we can paste into a browser on the other side of our RDP connection. I'll go ahead and I'll open up an RDP connection to a server so I can deploy out my Windows Probe. So I'll copy link location, open up an RDP connection. I'm actually going to paste that Windows Probe into a browser on the other end. So go ahead and I'll paste that download. There's my customer1 Windows probe setup.exe, and I'll go ahead and I'll save that locally. The probe is finished downloading here, so I'll go ahead and I'll double click on the Windows software probe and I'll run that probe install. Now I mentioned that we're going to have to create an account on this environment. When I go ahead and I click on next, I'm not using a proxy, so again I'll click next. It's going to ask me for credentials for this deployment. Right now it's suggesting administrator, as that's how I logged into this server. I don't want to use that account. In fact, I want to use RMM Tech. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to open up Active Directory, and I'm going to create that new RMM Tech account. So under the users container, I'm going to right click, new user. And this user is going to be logging in as RMM Tech. Now that password, of course, is the same password I set in N-central, which I purposely added a little bit of complexity to it. And I'm going to make sure that the password does not change and the password never expires. So go ahead and I'll click next, I'll click finish, and there we go. I now have a user account for deployment. Now by default this user account is just a domain user, which is a problem. He needs to be a domain administrator. So I'm going to right click, I'm going to add to a group, and I'm going to add him to domain admins. Now I'm going to go ahead and part of that installer put in RMM Tech, and of course that password I just set. Now that's granting that account the ability to log on as a service. My Windows Probe, when it gets installed, will actually run as a Windows service. So it needs the capability to start that Windows service with an account. And that account now has that capability. Now this is asking me if I'm using Intel vPro technology, which is an optional component that you can add to laptops and workstations from the vendor. I'll go ahead and click next, as I'm virtualized in this environment and do not have Intel vPro. And this is going to ask me for a discovery name and a target network. Now what actually happens here when I put in these details is that it's going to go out and ping every device I tell it to. You'll see the example on the right here, 192.168.10.1-254. Now, in order for my devices to be pingable, I need to make sure that the Windows Firewall is going to allow that. If my device is not pingable within N-central, it'll never show up. So my probe will actually not find that device if it doesn't respond to a ping. What happens to my device after it responds to a ping is the Windows Probe tries to install an agent on that device by accessing the admin share. So to see an example of both of these in action, I'm going to go ahead and open up a command prompt, and from this server happens to be 20.91, I'm going to ping its neighbor, which is 20.92. So I'll go ahead and I'll ping 192.168.20.92. 92 is another Windows server within this environment. So you can see here, reply to a ping. Now, in this case, this device will get discovered by N-central as it does reply to a ping. But I need to make sure that the agent can get installed as well. So I'm going to open up a Windows Explorer and I'm going to try to access the admin share. So you can see here I can type in 192.168.20.92 /admin $. Now in my case I can access the admin share on 9.2, which is perfect. That means that my Windows Probe, which will be installed on 9.1, is going to copy the agent over to that other server, which happens to be 9.2, and install that Windows agent on that device, and it'll get discovered perfectly. I need to make sure that each one of my devices that gets discovered is pingable and the admin share is available. So how we'll do this is to create a group policy object. Now, if you're not familiar with group policy, don't worry. This is a very simple group policy that we'll create. Now, under Administrative Tools, I should see Group Policy Management. If I'm doing this on, say for example, 2003 server, I may need to Google it and download and install it from Microsoft. If I do this on a 2008 and above, I may need to add that feature or that role to this device. That's Group Policy Management Console. Here I have Group Policy Management Console open. So I'm going to go ahead and right click on SE Training, my domain, and I create a GPO. And my GPO will be called N-central Network Prep, as I'm preparing the environment for deployment. So go ahead and I'll click OK. And if I expand SE Training, there's N-central Network Prep. Now I'm going to right click and I'm going to click Edit. And I'm going to be making changes to the Windows Firewall. So located under Computer Configurations, Policies, Administrative Template, Network, Network Connections, I'm going to go ahead and expand Windows Firewall, Domain Profile. And what I have here is I have each one of the settings within my Windows Firewall that I can change or modify if I desire. Now, we're going to go ahead and make two changes. We're going to allow ICMP, so I'm going to double click on Allow ICMP, and this will make sure that I can ping each one of the Windows devices in my domain. So I'll enable it and allow inbound echo request. The second change I'm going to do is make sure that the admin share is available on each one of my devices. So I'm going to allow inbound file and print sharing exception. Double click Enabled and an asterisk, which says anyone who's a domain administrator should be able to access the admin share within my environment. And I'll click OK. Now I can go ahead and close this box. I can right click and enforce that GPO, and that'll go ahead and propagate through my environment. Now, group policies can take 90 minutes to propagate through the environment, so keep that in mind. The last thing we're going to do here before we install the Windows Software Probe is we're going to make sure that DNS is configured properly. When we go out and we ping a device, we're going to try to resolve it to a name. Then we're going to take that name and resolve it back to an IP address to make sure they're the same. In a situation where they're not, Sally's PC resolves to a host name called Bill's PC. It's going to cause us problems. We need to make sure that DNS scavenging is enabled within my environment. So I'm going to start, open up DNS, and I'm going to right click on my domain controller and set aging/scavenging for all zones. By default, this is turned off. So we need to make sure that we enable this within the domain and set the number of days to the same number as DHCP leases in this domain. The default for that is 7 days within Windows. So unless you've changed it, that's the only reason to change it here. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click OK. It's going to ask me to apply these to all integrated zones, and I'll click OK. Now before I continue, right click, scavenge stale records right now, and click Yes. What I have now is I have an environment in which I should be able to ping every device. I should be able to access the admin share on every device. I should be able to resolve each IP address to a name and vice versa. And I have an account which is dedicated to an N-central deployment. Now, I mentioned that group policies take time to propagate out. So that means that doing a discovery 30 seconds after I created the GPO is not a good idea. It doesn't give it enough time to go out and fix any problems that perhaps there were. So instead of giving a discovery name and a target network, I'm simply going to skip this. I'm going to hit Next, I'm going to click Install, and I'm going to click Finish when I get the opportunity to. My probe has finished the install, so I'll go ahead and I'll click Finish. At this point, I'm done on my server, so I can log off or I can close this connection. Now, back in N-central, I'm still at customer 1 level, the customer I just deployed out to. So I'm going to click on the All Device view, and you'll see that my Windows Server has shown up. Now, what my Windows Probe is going to do is it's going to install a Windows agent also on that server. And you can see right now that hasn't happened yet. When an agent gets installed, I have an agent version. In N-central, if I have a Windows device, I always want a Windows agent installed. So keep that in mind. If I click on this server, you'll notice right now that some of these monitors are being done by the probe. You can see this on the right hand side. The agent is checking into N-central, so we're still waiting for that to finish. And patch status is a service that can only be monitored by the local agent. So once the agent's installed, patch status will update itself. Now if I click on the Properties tab on the top left here, I can scroll down a little bit and I will see that the local agent is going to get installed on this device. If I go back to my status page, you can see the local agent just finished the installation, and what it's going to do now is it's going to do an asset scan on itself, collect more asset information, and add more services to itself. Now we chose to skip the discovery job to give the domain enough time to actually propagate out that GPO. So we need to, of course, schedule ourselves a discovery job to find other devices in this domain. So under the actions on the left hand side, we're going to click Run a Discovery. And that's going to allow us to use that probe and actually scan the environment. Now I'm going to call this Scan the Network. And my scan of that environment is going to happen daily. Now you'll see here the IP range. Now the IP range will be formatted as 192.168.20.1-254. And that'll go ahead and pick up every single device within that network. Now that's how you'll typically configure this. Now what I'm going to do when I find these devices within 1-254 is I'm going to automatically import any laptop or workstation I find and install an agent. And same goes for servers. Now other devices includes switches, routers, firewalls, IP phones, even devices that are joined to maybe Wi-Fi but you don't have permission to scan. So I'm not going to automatically import that type of device. Instead, I'm going to get a list of them and choose what I want from that list. Now you can see here that under Advanced Settings, I have SNMP, Backup Exec, and Xylocore/Asigra. We use SNMP for network devices to automatically classify those devices and to apply network monitoring. So say for example I have a SonicWall in my environment. By default that SonicWall does not have SNMP enabled. Without SNMP, we'll ping that device, we'll monitor connectivity, so whether it's up or down, but we will not get more detailed stats like traffic or maybe CPU and memory. What we want to do is we want to make sure that every network device in our environment, every switch, every router, every firewall, has SNMP enabled so that we can do deeper monitoring using the professional license. Now, using SNMP here, I also want this installed and configured on some of my Windows servers. If I have Dell hardware, for example, or maybe HP hardware, if you install Dell Open Manage, or if you leave it installed from the vendor, and you install and enable SNMP, when we scan that device with a discovery job, we'll actually discover the hardware from the vendor and automatically apply hardware monitoring. So RAID status, temperature, fan status, etc. So SNMP is going to be important on network gear, and SNMP is going to be important on physical servers. SNMP will not need to be installed on laptops, workstations, or virtual servers. Backup Exec, of course, is for backup monitoring, and Xylocore/Asigra is another backup software, and again for backup monitoring. Now, if my environment has an ESX server or an ESXi server, I can go ahead and check that box to perform virtualization discovery. Now you can see here we're going to use the default ports and the default web services ports. Now, if you've changed these ports on your ESX or ESXi server, you can here. If you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry, you have not changed these ports. So you can leave these as default and it'll automatically pick up that server. Now the account in which it uses here, I need to add an account, and I'm going to add an account that's part of the root group. So for my ESX devices, my ESXi devices, perhaps I use the root account, and I'll specify a password. Now it's very possible that I have a different account on each ESXi host. So I can go ahead and add a new account and add a second or third account for the other ESXi servers as well. So it'll actually try multiple accounts part of that discovery. If I have a vCenter server, I can actually put in Windows credentials here. So domain/domain administrator that's allowed to access vCenter. I can save those changes and make those part of my discovery job. Now I'm going to choose when this discovery job happens. So I'm going to go ahead and specify that this is a reoccurring discovery job. So that means that this will automatically scan my environment at a scheduled time, perhaps every weekday or selected weekdays. So I can go ahead and come in here and say scan my environment at a time in which most devices should be online, so perhaps 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So if I finish, this will go ahead and schedule that recurring discovery job. Once I give my GPO enough time to propagate out, I can wait for my scheduled discovery job, or of course I can trigger a discovery job on demand by simply creating a new discovery job under Actions. I have a discovery job right now that's going to go out, scan the environment, and pull in any one of these devices. This is again scanning 1 to 254. Any device that is discovered as a Windows device, so we have permission to access it, it's going to automatically import the device into the all device view here and install an agent. Devices that we don't have access, so we don't have permission to access, will appear under the add button at the very top, which is the same button as add/import devices on the left hand side. And any sort of network device will also appear under that location. So if I go ahead and I click on that add button, you'll see here that so far, even though it's been a minute or two, it's picked up 15 devices in that range. Now a typical discovery job can take anywhere from 15 minutes to 45 minutes. Slower environments of course take longer, and new environments will be rather quick. If I click on import, you'll see that here are all the different devices that I've discovered so far. And you'll notice that I have a printer that was picked up because of SNMP. I have a switch/router again for SNMP. But you'll notice that .12 was picked up as other. What that means is that this device is either not part of the domain, and maybe it's a laptop or a workstation, or it's some sort of network device that does not have SNMP capabilities. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to import a couple devices that have been discovered so far. Keep in mind that my discovery job, I told it not to automatically import other devices. So therefore, anything that is not a Windows device. I'm going to select my printer, I'm going to select my switch/router, and click import. The first question I get asked is, am I mapping a device? What mapping means is, am I replacing in a device that already exists in N-central with a new device? I would be doing this if I was replacing hardware, for example. Sally's laptop is being replaced with a new one. I'm going to map them together so that all the existing reporting stays consistent. I can go and do historical reporting. In most situations, I'm not mapping devices. So you'll notice here, there's no map devices, and I can go ahead and click import. If N-central thinks the device is the same, so it'll automatically map them together, I'll actually get a button here that says unmap. If these devices are legitimately two different devices, I can unmap the devices if that happened. In my case, there's no device that N-central thinks is the same, so I'm going to go ahead and import. This will import that printer and that switch/router into N-central. It'll consume a license on them, and I can go ahead and click Finish. What I have now, if I go to my All Device view on the top left, is that I have 8 devices in total. So you can see here that I have .11, .35, there's the 2 devices I just imported, and I also have a bunch of different Windows servers and a couple different Windows laptops or workstations. You'll see here that it's going to automatically try to install a local agent on them. I've skipped ahead a little bit here. I've waited for my discovery job to find all my devices in my environment. I've deleted any device I didn't care to monitor by selecting that device and hitting delete. And you'll see here that the agent has deployed out to each one of these devices. What about devices that didn't show up? So if I go to the Add button at the very top, I scanned a very large network which had multiple domains in it. If I scroll down here, this is going to show me each one of my devices that were actually discovered. You'll see here that it did pick up a few other devices that potentially are on a different domain. What I can do if I want to import one of these devices is I can go ahead and I can select that device and I can import at the very top. When I click on import, you'll see that this .84 was classified as other. If I know this device is a different type of device, say for example this is a switch that doesn't have SMP capabilities, or maybe this is actually a workgroup PC but I still want to manage it, I can actually go ahead, select that device, and click on Edit. When I click on Edit here, I can specify manually the class, the operating system, and how I want to handle the device. So will I try to install a local agent regardless? Now, the fact that this was discovered as other would suggest that I can't deploy a local agent to that device. N-central would have tried this already, and N-central would have come back and failed to install a local agent. So what I'm going to do is I'm in fact going to say classify it as a workstation, because perhaps I know this is a workgroup PC, and I'm going to tell it that I'm going to install a local agent manually. So I've gone ahead and selected Microsoft Windows as its operating system. Now at this point I'm going to finish, and that device will show up on the all device view. And there you can see 84. Now if this is a workgroup PC, like I said, it's not going to be able to automatically install a local agent, but what I can do is I can actually install it manually and link those devices back together. If I click on the Properties tab here, I can scroll down and I can say Local Agent. And when I scroll down and hit Save, you'll see that an Agent tab has appeared on the top right. If I select the Agent tab, you'll notice that there's a Windows Agent.exe with an activation key. What this is used for is when a device exists in N-central and I want to install the agent manually. I can actually use the activation key so it links that resource to the N-central resource. I would log into that device remotely, run that executable, and use the activation key. Now at this point I have a few devices deployed out to. I have successfully deployed the agent to each one of these devices. I have imported network devices, both a switch and a printer. And of course, I gave it enough time for that group policy to propagate out by either waiting 90 minutes and scheduling that on-demand discovery job, or by scheduling a reoccurring discovery job perhaps later in the day or even the next day to scan that environment. Now, I need to make sure that other users can access N-central. So what I'm going to do is at my SO level, so one level above my customer, I'm going to make sure that I create accounts for accessing N-Central. Right now I'm accessing N-Central with the product admin account, which is the highest level privilege I have in N-Central. Instead, I want to be accessing it with SO credentials, or service organization credentials. I'm going to go ahead and scroll down under administration, and I'm going to click on user accounts. And here's where I can actually add user accounts. Now there's two ways to import user accounts within N-Central. I can add them based on email addresses, or I can add them based on an Active Directory server. I'll go ahead and I'll click on add, and here you can see a login name, which will be an email address, a password, a first name, and a last name. Now by default it's suggesting an SO admin account, which is an administrator for your MSP or your company. If I want here, I can select an SO user, which is a user level account which can see all customers. Best used for someone like an account manager who will want to run reports or view devices in N-Central, but won't be making any sort of changes. I have an SO tech account. This is best used when your technicians manage only certain customers and should not have access to other customers they don't manage. In a situation where all technicians manage all customers, SO admin is the best type of account to provide them. I can go ahead and I can save, and they can log in with that username and that password. Now, what may be convenient is to set up an LDAP integration. So if I go ahead and I click on LDAP servers, I can add a Microsoft Active Directory connection. This will ask me for a few different details here. The first one, of course, is I name this connection, and I can call this training deployment, which is my MSP name, training deployment LDAP. Now, this domain, how I format it, is very important. My domain perhaps is n-able. I do not want to put n-able.local. And the reason is, when my technician goes to log in, if I put n-able.local, he'll be forced to type n-able.local / his Active Directory account name. Instead, I'm simply going to put n-able. Now here, server 1 host and server 2 host are going to be the internal IP addresses of my Active Directory server. If, for example, your N-Central server is not hosted in-house, maybe N-able hosts it, or maybe it's in a colo facility, I'll need to make sure that I forward the appropriate port to my Active Directory server. Now, for LDAP integration, I can forward port 389 to my Active Directory server, or LDAP-S, or SSL enabled, I can forward port 636 to my Active Directory server. Now, of course, if this N-Central server is external, these server 1 hosts and server 2 hosts are not going to be private IP addresses. They're going to be publicly routable, fully qualified domain names. Now you can see here how I establish this connection. I need to specify a base DN. And there's an example here. CN, or containers, equals users, comma, DC equals your domain. So in my situation, this would simply be CN equals users, comma, DC equals n-able, comma, DC equals local. Now down below you can see the account in which I'll access my Active Directory server. It's best practice to create a new account here so that the password never gets changed and connection is broken to the N-Central server. That would stop you from being able to log in to the N-Central server with Active Directory credentials. I can go ahead and I can save my connection, then I can click on Accounts to import accounts within N-Central. At this point in time, You've made sure that your windows and probes communicate to the proper address for N-central. You have set up your mail relay server. You've made sure that users can log into N-central using either manual accounts or Active Directory. You've created a customer for deployment. You've installed a Windows probe if it's a domain environment. That probe has gone out, discovered your devices, imported them, and installed local agents on them. Or if it's a workgroup environment, you've installed either local agents manually, or you've had the end user install local agents. This concludes phase 1 of deployment. Next, we'll move on to phase 2, which is an explanation of rules, service templates, notifications, filters, etc., all core components of N-central.